Welcome to a special episode of the Robinson Report. We're doing a remote episode with an independent journalist, Jack Gately, down in Massachusetts, who has been following along with the indictment handed down last week in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts by the U.S. Attorney Leah Foley. There were seven Chinese nationals or people with historic connections to China, as they're described in the indictment, who are facing charges of money laundering, of marijuana trafficking, of bank fraud, wire fraud, and this is it's 22 pages of an indictment, but it's very carefully worded, and there was a lot there to unpack. There were some exhibits introduced that pointed towards potentially unindicted co-conspirators, including banks, law firms, some businesses in Maine. So there's a lot there to unpack, and Jack actually was the first one to point out that in the indictment, the most important thing is they were reading my reporting. They were reading the Maine Wire's first story exposing Chinese drug cartels operating in the state of Maine. So they were either looking to put a hit out on me, or they were worried that the intrepid journalists at the Maine Wire had cottoned on to what they were doing in the state of Maine. So Jack, thank you very much for bringing that to our attention. Thank you for reporting on this. I know you're just an independent journalist, but you've done more work on this than the Boston Herald and the Boston Globe combined. So I thank you for being willing to hit the street and ask some questions and do some, I would say, careful analysis of the paper trail related to the indicted seven individuals. So thank you very much for taking some time to talk with us.
My pleasure. When I was reading the indictment and I got down into the deep of it, and then it was like, wait a second, that's the title of Steve's article that these alleged drug lords are sharing on encrypted social message. And I was like, oh, well, they're reading his stuff. I was blown away in a way that's a big compliment for you, Steve, I guess.
Well, yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, and
from not from me, from the drug dealers.
Well, for sure. I kind of didn't know what to make of it at first. I really wanted to check the timeline, and I saw that it was just 4 days after that story had been published. And so I was curious if they had been kind of like waiting for media coverage, or did one of their, do they have a business partner or a unindicted co-conspirator in the state of Maine whose attention came to that article, and it was shared with them as a heads up. We might be getting some media attention, because I strongly doubt that Mr. Chen was, scrolling through X and was a follower of mine. I think he's more of a WeChat guy, as the indictment suggested. So I'd be interested to know, if it comes out during a potential trial, how that information, how he, got that information in the first place. But the more, I would say, the more interesting things are the lists of the exhibits that the Justice Department introduced pointing towards money laundering. So one of the things included in the indictment were very large transactions that the government alleges were involved money that was unlawfully obtained. These included large payments to law firms, payments to real estate companies, payments to individuals, payments to restaurants, payments to a real estate holding company in Maine that was owned by some brothers who run an excavation company. There's no allegation of wrongdoing toward the brothers, just that they were potentially receiving, money or rent from these people. So talk to me a little bit about what you've been able to unravel as you've looked at these exhibits about some of the locations and individuals in Massachusetts.
So you're exactly right. This indictment from July 2025, just this month, has a lot more breadcrumbs in it than, say, a very similar type of indictment that was handed down in 2022. Very similar charges from 2022, but that indictment was kind of just plain vanilla. This indictment from this month has all sorts of detail, and really paints a picture that we didn't really know much about here in eastern Massachusetts. So far here in Massachusetts, we've only been able to track about 15 or 16 organized crime illegal pot grows in Massachusetts. Most of all have been from the western part of the state, not eastern part of the state. But here with this most recent indictment, we have an alleged ringleader in Braintree, where the feds seized $270,000 in cash, including money that was stashed away in a secret compartment in his vehicle in the driveway. We spoke to the neighbors who said that they came heavy in October to issue the search warrant, and then again last week at about 6 a.m. to make the arrest. Out of the 7 people that were indicted, the feds have arrested 6, and I believe there's a 7th man, both from Greenfield, Massachusetts, and New York City, that is still on the run. He's on the loose. And a lot of these things, as you've known already, Steve, trace back to New York City and especially Brooklyn.
They do, yeah. Flushing, New York, Brooklyn, those areas, and that's in part because of a large Chinatown community, but also because the state of New York will give driver's licenses to non-citizens, and you don't have to prove citizenship or legal status. They'll give you a driver's license right away. And the criminal organizations have become very skilled and adept at manipulating or exploiting that process to make sure that their indentured servants get identity documents, or to make sure that their capos get identity documents. So that's the biggest nexus we see with New York. But California, Massachusetts, to a certain extent, they're the same way in terms of how they'll give out identity documents.
And when you mentioned that, sorry to interrupt, but one of the important charges in this most recent indictment is that Mr. Chen from Braintree was actually, how do we want to say this, importing labor from China through Mexico, forced labor. So basically indentured servants, as you mentioned. Sorry to interrupt.
Well, yeah, I know. I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's, I think that's a big change for the Justice Department. Up here in Maine, there was a raid in Passadumkeag, and the first guy, Shishen Guo, who pled guilty to federal charges, and we got the law enforcement documents, or the court documents, from that case. And in the court documents, the Penobscot County Sheriff had filed reports about their interrogation of an unindicted individual who was present on the scene when the search warrant was executed. And he said that he was plucked off the street in New York and taken to Maine against his will, where they were going to turn him into a cannabis worker. So that, to me, sounds like human trafficking. However, for I guess a year and a half, the U.S. Attorney for Maine, Darcy McElway, a Biden appointee, was very clear. It published statements and gave out, spoken, written statements saying there's no evidence of human trafficking. We've seen no evidence of human trafficking. Now it appears the U.S. Attorney in Massachusetts is saying, no, that's not the case. The MO was clearly to operate as effectively snakeheads, to bring people across the border from China, fly them into New England, take away their passports, lock their passports in safes, and bring them to grows in Massachusetts and Maine, and hold them there until they'd worked off their debt. The idea that the laborers at these sites aren't being seriously exploited at the very least has always been, bogus to me. The idea that they're all here voluntarily is totally bogus, because I've seen some of these sites and some of the conditions that they're living in. And, you might not be in chains, but if you're at a marijuana grow in the middle of the woods in, Greenbush, Maine, and you don't have a car, and you don't speak the language, and you're an hour and a half away from the nearest grocery store, you're not exactly free. So I know it's a murky thing, especially when you're dealing with a language and cultural barrier. But the indictment seems to make it very clear that this was a human trafficking operation.
No doubt. And when you also look at the other charges from most recently, actually, the 2025 indictment here, there's a number of transactions where you said that there's also effectively money laundering to real estate transactions. So as the whole illegal pot business becomes more and more successful, as an entrepreneur, you have a problem. You don't know where to put your money. And this thing kind of invests. They're basically pouring their money back into the business by buying additional real estate, which helps wash it. But also some of that additional real estate is used to grow more product. And so you saw hundreds of thousands of dollars go towards real estate deposits here in Massachusetts, and as you mentioned, in Maine. And there was a little kind of unusual flow to those real estate transactions, I've been a real estate broker in Massachusetts, so this is something that caught my eye right away, is that slightly before the transaction, the buyer was sending the money to their own attorney, and then presumably, although we don't have the settlement statement, their attorney would then turn that money over to the seller at the closing, which is slightly peculiar. Usually wouldn't take that extra step. Usually just the buyer would come to the closing with an extra check from the bank, but not from the lawyer. So it was like an extra step to move the money over to the lawyer and then to the seller. And you explained to me actually what that was all about. What you tell me again, because that was a little bit over. I'm only on money laundering 101. I know you've advanced.
Yeah, well, I actually just learned of this phrase very recently. It's called seasoning the money. And if you have $250,000 in cash, and it's from a pot grow or a coin operated laundry or a car wash, and you haven't paid taxes on it and don't plan to pay taxes on it, but you still want to use it for, say, a real estate investment, if you deposit that in your bank, they're going to file a suspicious transaction report because it's over $10,000. They're going to ask you what it was for. The IRS is going to learn about it. They're going to come to you with some questions about, hey, did you pay taxes on this? Where's it from? How did you earn it? However, if you bring that bag of cash to your law firm and you say, I would like to put this in your trust account, your IOLTA account, then you can have your lawyer prepare a bank check to draw against your trust account. And that way, when the real estate agent sees it, they can accept it. Like a real estate agent can't accept a bag of cash for a closing, but they can accept a bank check that draws on a lawyer's trust account.
Sure, that would go, I would tell you right away, that would go unquestioned.
And that's what I've learned is the common practice for washing money that has been earned on a cash basis by businesses. Plenty of businesses for decades have used this tactic. It's a tactic just that the illegal cannabis growers have expanded on very successfully, and it seems that it works well until it doesn't, until you get indicted for illegal activities that are unrelated to the tax avoidance. It can potentially cause some problems for lawyers who are abetting that kind of behavior. So I thought it was very significant that there was a law firm named there, appeared to be a very large law firm, very obviously a law firm that caters to Chinese international clientele with I think it was like a $300 and something thousand transaction to them. So as I learned more about so-called seasoning the money, that's exactly what it seemed to be, that the U.S. attorney was laying out with those items placed in the indictment. Like, hey, here's the operation. Here's how it was working. Here's how the illegal immigration, the human smuggling played into it, and here's how they washed the money in order to expand and acquire more real estate. One thing that was kind of hinted at in the indictment, and then in the previous one that you brought up of what was it? Jinhua Zhang was indicted for a $25 million alleged money laundering. He's pleaded guilty to it, but hasn't been sentenced. So I think you can reasonably infer that he's cooperating or providing information to the Justice Department. Part of that earlier indictment was that they were using offshore accounts or front businesses in Cambodia, Brazil, to move money around internationally. So there's a little bit of that. A suggestion of that in this indictment, but there's no clear, bright line to the Chinese Communist Party, and it doesn't, there wasn't a national security or government aspect to it. It seemed like these 7 individuals, particularly Mr. Chen, the indicted alleged ring dealer, was just living the high life. $1.5 million house, a Porsche, Rolexes, Cartier bracelets.
Hey, that North Braintree neighborhood is a nice neighborhood. It's kind of like just tucked in right there. Very nice neighborhood. It's one of those neighborhoods. There's no traffic. You don't go there unless you're going there or lost. I would ask you this though, Steve. I start to wonder whether these folks are really concerned about being caught and sent away to jail for a long time, based upon these two things. First off, like the search warrant for Mr. Chen's house in Braintree was in October of last year. and he just continued to live there, like assuming the feds wouldn't come back and pick him up, which they did earlier this month. I mean, you would if the feds came and raided my house and took $270,000, and I was a Chinese national, I'd probably find my way back to China or at least someplace else. And the other thing, which we discovered when we read through the fine print of this indictment, this most recent indictment, is Mr. Chen actually sent $41,500 to one of the men that was indicted in the 2022 indictment. So the guy was indicted by the federal government, and he's still allegedly receiving money to launder. They don't seem that worried about getting caught.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like brazen behavior, but maybe they just learned or developed the belief, which I would say is reasonable, after operating for 4 or 5 years like this, allegedly, that they were never going to get caught. Under the Biden administration, there didn't seem to be a strong will to investigate. That's another thing that, or I guess at least to prosecute, I should say. That's another thing that jumped out at me is that if you read the court documents here, all the investigation was done when Biden was president. It was just that, I guess there's when the new U.S. attorney is being, moved into that office, there's a little bit of a delay maybe. But this was essentially a case that was entirely investigated under President Biden and his Democratic U.S. attorney. Leah Foley just kind of came in and said, "Yeah, do that one. Like, pull the trigger. What are we waiting for?"
Set priorities.
Yeah, and so I wonder how much of that is happening in Maine because the U.S. attorney up here has done a little bit. Moved to seize 4 houses. There's like maybe 1 or 2 federal cases, but really not nearly as aggressive as she could be, given the extent of search warrants that have been executed, and no state level involvement in any of those. So I'm wondering what.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Back the whole Biden thing. Back in 2020, there was a case made against 4 or 5 properties out in Western Mass, Monson and Palmer. They raided. The federal government raided 4 properties. One was a greenhouse business. Seized 4,100 plants. You would think that this would be all teed up perfect for prosecution, facing up 2 people facing up to 20 years. 3 months into the Biden administration in April of 2021, charges completely dismissed.
Very interesting. Very interesting. You wonder just how close Hunter Biden's connections are with some of the individuals who are involved in the Chinese drug cartels here in New England, and could that really have had an influence? I think that's a little bit beyond my expertise of getting into the Hunter Biden laptop and whether there was a specific strategy of leniency against the Chinese drug cartels. But there's no question that Biden's immigration policy enabled and abetted the specific model that was laid out in the District of Massachusetts last week. One other thing, Jack, you chased down a little bit this hot pot business that was listed in the indictment as having allegedly received payments from unlawfully obtained sources. I looked it up. It immediately came back as a California-based business. There's only one business in the country with that LLC, that name. But you actually were able to find one that it's basically a DBA. So there's it's officially registered as one name, but as a DBA that matches from the indictment, and it's in Massachusetts. What were you able to learn by visiting that location?
Well, I went there today, actually, and the name that we're talking about is Wishu Wu Hot Pot. And you're right, the only LLC that the indictment references, the only LLC with that name is in California. The thing is, Steve, the LLC in California is established with one single organization, articles of organization in California, which actually tracks, because a lot of these LLCs set up by these individuals are just the initial paperwork that would be required to establish a bank account, and then they never keep up with the annual paperwork. So actually, the paperwork in California is scant, and that actually tracks with a pattern of LLCs. But having said that, it ends up to be a very unusual name, apparently, And you're right, the only two references anywhere on the internet that we can find was in California, in suburban San Francisco, and in North Quincy, which is where we went to today. So the owner of the Wishu Wu Hot Pot restaurant in North Quincy is actually indicted and facing trial later this month in the 2022 indictment, which Mr. Zhang, that you referenced earlier, is the alleged ringleader. He's facing sentencing on September 2nd, but it's been postponed so many times. The trial for Mr. Fen Chang, who owns the restaurant, is later this month. The restaurant was, according to the feds, the scene of a, how do we want to say this, a transaction where Mr. Chen allegedly delivered a check that wasn't actually weed money. It was from financial scams from a bank account that had been closed because it red flagged, and so they closed it. And so he had a check which he signed over, according to the indictment and the co-conspirator statements, to Mr. Zhang, and the exchange was made outside of the hot pot restaurant in North Quincy, according to the co-conspirator indictments, or statements were just released last week. The problem was the bagman in this case was an undercover agent for the federal government.
It happens. It happens sometimes. Howie Carr, when I was working for him, always used to say that every time you try to hire a hitman, it's going to be a federal agent. Never try to meet up with a hitman in a hot pot restaurant or a bar, because it's always a federal agent. But yeah, I mean, it's I guess broadly speaking, it seems like the dynamic we have here is a group of Chinese nationals who are using human trafficking, drug trafficking to make a whole bunch of money, and then figuring out, how do we deal with it? How do we use this money? How do we move it around internationally? They probably landed on the Fed's radar as a result of those kinds of transactions. I mean, it's you start paying $300,000, $600,000 to a law firm or for real estate with cash, you're going to catch somebody's attention eventually. It seems like there's a big organized crime problem here in New England.
What I want to just mention quickly, too, is that this isn't victimless. A lot of people just say, it's just weed. The problem is, and you've covered this at the main wire so many times, it's not for really me to say, but I'm only saying it because we haven't touched upon it yet. The weed that is being grown in these illegal marijuana grow houses all throughout Maine, and apparently now we're at the tip of the iceberg here in Massachusetts, is not the same weed that the 43-year-old mom that breaks bad and goes to the dispensary from Hingham. That's not the same weed. It's filled with pesticide. Well, you know the story. Who knows what's in it?
Yeah, I mean, it is. There's a reckless disregard for the end consumer, and we know that there's Chinese-made pesticides coming in. They're importing them illegally. They're using them illegally. They're dangerous. They're toxic. There's no registered use for them. It's not like you're taking a pesticide that's meant for tomatoes and applying it on a different plant without a license. It's totally different from that. These are like nerve agents that they're using. So yeah, I mean, it is dangerous. But the other thing I'll say is, and I thought about this, when we've gone to a lot of these marijuana sites in Maine, you'll see litter. I mean, there's litter at all of these sites. They're trashed. And so you'll see food products and food wrappers, and it's not the kind of food products that you can get at Hannaford or Market Basket or Shaw's. It's the kind of food that comes from a restaurant in Chinatown. It's like, food products like noodles or bottles of soy sauce, whatever, where there's no English script on it whatsoever. And I think the reasonable conclusion that I've drawn from that is that the people who are living at these houses aren't going out and shopping for food. They're not driving to the Hannaford and buying their food and bringing it back. They're in fact getting food deliveries with the vans that come every 30 or 40 days to pick up marijuana. So I think that you could be dealing with a case where you've got dozens, if not hundreds, of marijuana houses in rural Maine that currently have individuals there who are similar to the ones from this indictment, where they are trapped there. They're working off a snakehead debt. They don't have their passports. Their passport is sitting in a safe somewhere with the guy who's got the Rolexes and the Porsches, and they're not getting a food delivery because maybe the person who was supposed to come pick up the weed is indicted, or maybe that person is too scared. Maybe they're spooked now and they think that the law enforcement's going to be waiting for them. But I wonder how many indentured servants who are ensnared in similar schemes are going to be effectively abandoned at these properties in rural Maine. And certainly when you talk about human trafficking, not a victimless crime at all.
No, what a nightmare. What a nightmare. And obviously exposing the naivete of these policymakers that legalized weed, thinking, we can add a bunch of compliance, it will be safe, we can add a bunch of taxes. The problem is, they priced it way up here, and they just pretended as if nobody would actually see the opportunity. They just ignored that this is an opportunity, no matter how illegal it is, and somebody came along and said, wow, this is a big opportunity. If it's illegal, who cares? They'll fill in the marketplace. It just, the whole legalization seemed to be incredibly devoid of any belief of basic economics.
Yes, I mean the law was essentially written for angels rather than for businessmen and people who were willing to look the other way, or even just drive a U-Haul full of pot into New Hampshire or Rhode Island or Connecticut. Basically any state where they haven't developed robust legalization for adults. You drive a U-Haul of marijuana there, and they sell it at a tobacco shop, at a hemp shop, and just call it THCA or THCP or hemp. If you're willing to enslave human beings, I think mislabeling your marijuana product probably isn't that big of a step for you to take. And so that's one thing I underestimated until recently, was the extent to which a lot of this product is being sold in tobacco shops and head shops throughout the United States. And so when you're the first one to legalize, or you're at the bleeding edge of legalization, you're effectively responsible for the supply that's rising to meet demand in the other states. So it's not just like Maine's going to grow all the weed that the Mainers are going to smoke. No, Maine is responsible now for growing the weed that everybody in the East Coast and the Midwest is smoking as well. So I think Maine was not prepared, and Massachusetts wasn't prepared for the level of demand that there was going to be for the product, and just how desperate people would be to fulfill that demand, the steps that they would take to do that. So what do you think what is to come next, Jack, in Massachusetts with these 7 individuals? I know our hot pot, not bagman, but I guess what's the
undercover
the
agent?
The undercover agent, the one who passed money to an undercover agent. I guess he's not the bagman, but he's the payor. So what's next in his trial, and what are some important dates we might want to keep an eye out for with the 6 individuals who are in custody, as well as the 7th one who is still on the lam?
Well, I think the first 2 dates that we have are later this month. Mr. Fen Chen faces his trial in Boston at federal courthouse. So I think I'll try to be there for at least the opening statements. The ringleader of the 2022 money laundering scheme faces sentencing on September 2nd, but that's been postponed, as you mentioned, multiple times. And the only reasonable conclusion you can make from that is that he's cooperating.
Yeah, so, he's singing like a I don't know, like a what do they say, pigeon stool? I don't know. He's singing, he's cooperating, he's doing everything he can to reduce his sentence. It sounds like they've got him pretty cold.
And believe it or not, one of the guys from the 2022 conspiracy, he's already pled guilty and went to jail already. And he went to jail at the beginning of this year. He'll be out in October.
Wow. That is a very light sentence. I mean, that does suggest that he pro-offered quite a bit of information in order to get a very, very brief sentence. But it goes back to what you were saying about Mr. Chen, the alleged ringleader that kind of kicked this off. At the top of the indictment in Massachusetts last week. gets his search warrant in October and he's still hanging around his house rather than fleeing back to China or to Cambodia or Brazil. It seemed like he maybe felt he was untouchable and didn't think that law enforcement was going to come for him, or he'd prefer to do a brief jail sentence in Massachusetts than return to his home country in China.
Cost of doing business, Steve.
Well, Jack, thank you very much. I appreciate you covering this and following it down in Massachusetts, and always grateful to see someone else following this beat. And we'll look forward to talking with you again sometime as we learn more about the connections between the Chinese drug cartels activity in Maine and in Massachusetts, and potentially in other states. I think that this is going to be. I think pretty soon you're going to start to see connections throughout the eastern United States. Because these operations are everywhere in the United States, and the Trump administration appears to have an appetite to take them on.
We'll keep you posted.
All right. Thanks, Jack.
You're welcome. Thank you.